All right. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. It's an honor to be together once again. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah Study, live online on a Shabbos morning. And I'm joined this morning, as always, by my dear colleagues, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Mark Gilman of Southern Florida and Golf Digest. So it's wonderful to have you here once again.
And Rabbi Emeritus, let me just say
I'm
this.
so sorry.
People think I'm employed by a golf magazine.
No.
Which I'm not. But I am Rabbi Emeritus, not just a rabbi. I'm the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Torah at, this is our full name of our synagogue, Temple Beth Torah at historic exit 50 of the Long Island Expressway. That's the actual name of our synagogue.
Historic exit 50. And in the community where he lives, he's the youngest Jewish person. That's the other part of it, because people live forever in southern Florida.
I was working.
Anyway, good morning. It's great to be together. We've reached the end of the book of Exodus, and the last, the 5 parshiot, but the 4 that we're interested in, Truma and Tetzaveh, and Vayakel Pekudei, tell the story of the creation of the first great Jewish institution, the Mishkan. The word Mishkan means a dwelling place, and it takes its name from the 8th verse of the 25th chapter of Exodus, when God says to Moshe, "V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham," have them make me a Mishkan, have them make me a mikdash, have them make me a dwelling place, a holy place, a sacred place, and I will dwell within them, within the people Israel. And that holy place, that mikdash, or that mishkan, that dwelling place, becomes a sort of portable Mount Sinai. The people Israel, having met God at Mount Sinai and received the commandments of revelation at Mount Sinai, are now about to continue their journey. They're not going to return to Mount Sinai. What they're going to do instead is to bring Mount Sinai with them by creating a facsimile of Mount Sinai. It's a tent, and in the tent are a number of accoutrements, including the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah, the table for the bread and the incense burners. And that institution, that place, is the first great religious institution of the Jewish people. And so the question I'd like to ask this morning, as we think about institutions, as we think about the places and the institutions we build, where we meet each other and we meet God, where we share Torah and convey Torah to our children, where we build communities, what is the current state of Jewish institutions? And the question that so many people keep asking me is, how will COVID affect and change and evolve or destroy Jewish institutions? We have all worked in synagogues. What is going to be the future of synagogues after this catastrophe? What is the future of the Jewish Federation? What is the future of Hillel? What are the future of the institution structures that we have built for Jewish life? And what is the meaning of those institutions? What are the values or the value of those institutions, the worth of those institutions, especially as we look into a world so very different than the one that we left just a year ago? Rabbi Gilman, let's begin. You were a synagogue rabbi for how many years?
36 years.
36 years. So when you look at synagogues today, and the synagogue representing, let's say, the retail outlet of Jewish life in America, what's the future of synagogues today?
Well, I think this parsha and this pandemic really work together to bring forward a fundamental point of introspection, and that point, that issue is, what is our value proposition? What is it that we are offering people that is spiritually essential? So if we look at the parsha, what Judaism at the time, Mishkan Judaism, if you want to say, what it offered the people was a priesthood and a set of sacrifices, daily and holiday sacrifices, both animal and also grain and others, that were essential in acting out their Jewish life. That was their value proposition. In order to be Jewish, you need to make sacrifices of various things, and the priesthood, the Kohanim, Levim, they are the ones who must organize it and accept it. And the synagogue, the temple, was essential because that was a place when they had many different temples in the land. They were done there, but in 621, Josiah centralized Jewish belief in Jerusalem. And that was their value proposition. You need us because you need to offer sacrifices. Well, that's over. That's gone because the temple is gone and the priesthood is basically gone. And so they had to recreate Judaism. They could have let it die, but they didn't. And the geniuses, and they were geniuses, spiritual geniuses, the rabbis, they recreated Judaism so that in place of sacrifices, we had prayers. And in place of the offerings, we had matbei tefillah, an order of praying in which each prayer replaced a sacrifice. And in place of the priesthood, of course, we had the rabbinate, which was not inherited, but it was a meritocracy. And so the value proposition of rabbinic Judaism, which was intact, and we're living through what I believe will be not the last days of it, but a dramatic transformation. That value proposition is you need a Beit Knesset, a Beit Midrash, and a Beit Tefillah. You need a place of gathering, a place of study, and a place of prayer. Okay? Now, when people can't gather because of the pandemic, they can't study except via Zoom, and they can't pray together except via Zoom. You have to ask yourself, what are we offering people? Now, the traditional offering in my big suburban synagogue was, like everywhere in America, our value proposition was, give us your kids to 3 or 4 years, and you have a bar mitzvah, and hopefully we will integrate you into the community and love you enough so that at the end of your child's bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, you'll stay on and as a part of the community. I think that's over, not because it's over for everyone, but it's over for everyone because of the pandemic. Now, what could come back is going to be very different. First of all, I think people are going to be less anxious for the standard synagogue, bar mitzvah, and party. I think that's going to be a thing of the past. And with other institutions in Jewish life, like Chabad, offering bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs in a very short-term situation, that cuts off the revenue stream of having kids in the religious school for 3 or 4 years. For synagogues like Valley Beth Shalom and others that have a school, that's still a value proposition, but it works best where the community has public schools that are not attractive to their congregants. In places where public schools are attractive, synagogues are going to be in much worse shape. And we had a revenue stream, a value proposition. We offered pre-K classes, and that was very good for us. But then the public schools offered them as well, and our revenue stream dried up. Our caterer dried up. And it's created a very, very difficult situation. So what we offer now, I think, is going to be refined in terms of religious belief. It's going to be that people need a place to find hope in difficult times, to find hope in traditional points of stress, which is their death and the death of those they love, to reconnect to belief in God in a really spiritual way, to reconnect with solidarity with the Jewish people, which synagogues have always offered, and what you offer so brilliantly at Valley Beth Shalom, and we tried to do at Temple Beth Torah, I think we did it well, was a community for people who wanted to gather and create a religious community. But it's going to be different. Our value proposition of the past will not work in the future, but What will work is something that is attuned to people's needs right now.
Thanks, Mark. Sherry, you were a synagogue rabbi for a number of years, but you've also worked in other institutions. You were leader at Hillel, and now you're vice president of university, and you've done a wonderful job transforming the whole notion of a Jewish university and discovering, I don't know, 500,000 students across the world through this medium. So talk to us about what happens to institutions now.
So disruption is a time for disruption. With the destruction of the temple, that was the emergence of prayer and all these other ways of observing. So I'm a big believer in disruption and change. And I think COVID has accelerated disruption by 10, 20 years, right? So I'm delighted by that. What I think it's going to force institutions to do is to refine what they do best and to really double down on that. Because the synagogues become everything to everyone. I needed this, I needed to be that. And that's why rabbis are overworked, exhausted. I was an exhausted pulpit rabbi for 10 years, right? What really we need is a really refined message. What a synagogue does for me is it provides true intimacy, inspiration to elevate my Jewish life and to find like-minded people on that same journey. And so to be in a community of intimate, striving Jews that want to grow their soul is something that synagogues can double down on. Institutions can no longer a federation can no longer say, give me the money and I'll distribute it, because by the way, you can give it directly to whomever you want via the internet. So now it's going to be, what information can we provide you to elevate you in your tzedakah like-mindedness? Where are these things? So I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to really refine our message, get tight on it, and actually get excellent at what we do. Like, I'd love to see rabbis not pulled in 900 directions of a pulpit trying to be everything to everyone, but being really good at what they do and what they offer to their members. And so people really sit there with such pride, the way they feel about, I went to Harvard or I went to Yale. Sometimes people feel about their alma maters. We want people literally to say, I'm a proud member of VBS. And by the way, VBS, Sinai, there's a few shuls that already have that, but the majority of shuls don't necessarily have that. And I think that's a possibility for every single community worldwide.
What have you learned you haven't been at the university, it's a year now already?
2 years. 2 years.
I'm sorry. What have you learned in the 2 years you've been there, especially since the COVID catastrophe, about pushing out the walls of an institution and rethinking its reach into the community?
So the word for place in Hebrew is makom, which is also another name for God. And we used to think of place as a geographically bounded place. So the long answer by way of that definition is that place is where we discover our ability to grow. And there's a lot of geographical places we can do it. We can do it in technology. The question becomes sort of, what I've learned from AJU is that people are hungry for this. They are alone in their search. They're looking for other people, not just globally. They're looking for people in their neighborhood. And we want to really, I think for AJU, we want to really elevate Jewish wisdom and pipeline people into their communities. We're not a destination. We're not a membership. We're not a hub. So I think for me, what I've learned is people are hungry for that, not only that really brilliant wisdom that inspires them, but also for people that they share that with in their local community, that they can share those experiences and transform that wisdom into practical living.
But let me push you just a little bit, okay? Because this medium that we've been using now for a year, the three of us, has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is it erases geography. So a person who lives in Boston or Johannesburg or Tel Aviv or London can listen to an American Jewish university program and feel like they're part of the group, learning from a scholar or learning from a writer or learning from a professor. It offers that capacity. At the same time, it removes and in some ways displaces face-to-face, real human contact. So what is your experience of that? The thrill of reaching people across the globe instantaneously, and the loss of the real face-to-face kind of touching each other,
So
hearing each other.
I think everybody's seen that as a dichotomy. It's either or. I think it's both now, that you can't hold someone's hand and put their hand on your face and give them the love that they need in a moment of suffering on digital. I mean, I can't go like this and grasp your hand, Eddie. It's just not working. I can't go like this, right? It just doesn't work.
You can try.
I can try, but I will never give you that moment of when I sit next to you and place my hand on your face and say, like, I understand. That cannot be replaced in digital. So I think it's not an either or. It's how are we going to integrate the two in our life to create the kind of elevation that we want to live a life of Kedusha. So I don't think it's either or.
Thank you. Mark, I want to tap your experience of one of your previous enterprises. You and Reverend and Father Tommy Hartman had a remarkable gig called the God Squad. You were on radio, you were on television, you were on newspapers, you gave 1,000 speeches across the country doing that gig. And one of the things that occurs to me is that, while we might not think of the God Squad as an institution, you could, in the sense that it did something which no other institution in the community was doing. It brought together a like-minded rabbi and a like-minded Catholic priest, and invited other like-minded people to gather around and overhear your conversations, to enjoy the affection you had for each other, and to share the wisdom that you had with each other. So how does that inform this conversation about institutions? You guys discovered a need for something that didn't exist.
Right. Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's a way of paying you a compliment, which is always hard because of your humility, but you're just going to have to sit there and listen to this. The truth of the matter is that I don't want this to be misunderstood. It probably will be that, Eddie, you're too good for just one synagogue. You're too good for just one synagogue. Now, the people at VBS are so lucky, so lucky. And I used to come on Shabbos just to be your student. And thanks to Sherry, who said, you got to go study with Eddie and you got to go there or you're going to die here in LA. And she was totally right. But the truth of the matter is, one day, I'll tell you a story about Tommy and I. One day we're out in Pennsylvania talking to a clergy group. And he said, I want you to understand the value of the media. Now, this was way before Zoom. This was just TV and cable. But I said, you may not realize that how much the media is a part of your mission and your work in the church. I said, this morning, and so we did a thought experiment that I'd like you to do, Eddie, as well, and Sherry too. And that is, over your entire career, how many different people do you think you had a chance to speak to? And will have a chance to speak to, because your career is nowhere near over, like mine. How many people did you and will you speak to in the course of Eddie Feinstein's rabbinate? And you pick a number, and we asked the priests and the ministers who were listening to our lecture to think of a number. And one of them came up with maybe 20,000 people over the course of my whole ministry. And the priest, not to be outdone, said, well, maybe we're in the 70,000 range. And I said, okay, this morning on the Don Imus show, Tommy and I spoke to 3 million people. Then we went on Good Morning America, where we were the religion reporters, and we spoke to 4 million people. That's 7 million people that we spoke to in one day. So when you add up the impact of the media on bringing what Christians call the good news, what we call Torah, in bringing that to people who aren't members of the synagogue, who are just sitting there looking for hope and inspiration, as Sherry beautifully said, some way to enrich their spiritual journey and fulfill it, they can tune in now via Zoom and have for the last year and heard whatever wisdom we had. And they can continue to do that and will continue to do that when COVID goes away. That is the great advantage of what the digital world is offering. It's offering an opportunity for the greatest teachers in the Jewish world to reach the most people, and not a little bit more than they reach in the synagogue, but kaboom, just millions more. And that's what accounted for our notoriety and our popularity, that we were able to reach out, and these people, you can't believe this, but it's true. They said, when we see you on Good Morning America or Imus or wherever else we see you, we feel connected to you. So this idea that we've lived with, which is not true, it isn't true. What Sherry beautifully said, I can't touch your face. It's true. That's true. We can't get that level of intimacy, but we can get a level of intimacy with people who would never come to the synagogue, because they are now able to connect with you online through Zoom and through a variety of other platforms that enable Jewish teaching to go on. And what it does is it lifts the quality of teaching way beyond what it could normally offer, because the teachers that we offered at our synagogue were of varying qualities, but now the entire Jewish world is open. And I think that's a change that's going to enrich Jewish life. It's going to dramatically change what we mean when we say community. I mean, I saw people over Yontif here in Florida in our gated community who said, yeah, my community is I listen to Central Synagogue service and I listen to Tetzaveh Torah service, and you're my community, because I was able to connect that way. I wouldn't have been able to connect that way here, and I'm not a member of the synagogue. So what they're saying is change and embrace this. Embrace what Tommy and I began, but we were too ignorant of technology to know what we were doing. But what we were really doing is what actually Tommy said it this way. He said, why do you think Jesus went to the Galilee to preach? Because that was the biggest city around. So he went where he could reach the most people. And as much as we tended to criticize, the televangelists and all of that, they got something right. They understood that there is a factor of 1 million more than we can normally reach once we embrace the media.
I want to go deeper than just media, though. I really appreciate that. And it's very powerful. And Sherry's experiment with the American Jewish University and her Biachad program bears that out remarkably. But there's something else that you did. See, number one, there's an attack on institutional life in general in America. Yeah. Millennials, younger folks, look at the institutions of the community as if they're like the trees in the neighborhood. They've always been there. Nobody planted them. Nobody waters them. Nobody fertilizes them. And they're just there. And so they take them for granted until they disappear. And by the way, that's going to be really interesting when COVID's over, how many stores, restaurants, libraries, other institutions that we've grown up with are going to be gone, and people are then going to miss them. Then they're going to miss them. But there is a basic attitude that, I don't need to support these things because they're always there. I hear this a lot from people, Jewish people in my community, who just don't understand that the synagogue needs to be supported. It's always going to be there. It's always just there for me when I need it, and I can use it as I need it and then ignore it the rest of the time. That's number one. So the first question is the power and need for institutions to connect us, the power and need of institutions to make a statement about the values that matter in life. And then you've talked about the evolution of institutions, that this catastrophe has forced us to look deeply into what you call the value proposition of institutions. What do they do for us? And is that really worth it? And are there people willing to invest in that, invest personal resources, material resources, and time and energy to keep these institutions alive? This is a very, very big question. A very important question. You've talked about the evolution of institutions. I mean, the language of disruption that Sherry uses. There's Steve Jobs' basic idea that you should run around and break things, which is fine because it forces us to evolve. It forces us to rethink. It forces us to reconsider. We don't get stuck in the ruts of institutional life, which shape us instead of us shaping our institutions. Very, very important. But what I want to, the next piece of this then is, okay, then what do these institutions do? And Mark, one of the things I get from your experience with Father Hartman, with Father Tommy, is that, I don't know how to say this in any other way. It's an insane culture.
Yes.
The culture is just insane. And there are very few places to go to hear a calm, thinking, reflective, moral voice. Your mother says, sit up straight, chew your food, and do the right thing. But beyond your mom, where in the culture, right? Where do you go to hear somebody say, let's talk about what it means to be an upright person? Let's talk about what it means to be a moral person. Let's talk about resisting the consumer culture and its obsession with acquisition and its superficiality as it deals with human relationships. And let's talk about moral truth. And here you get two guys who are deeply rooted in their religious traditions, but different traditions, and yet they come together in this common ground of moral truth. And even when you guys disagreed with each other, there was a common affection for the idea that there is a moral truth in the world. And you guys represented that moral truth in the world. And it was a place to have that moral, and there is no other voice in the community right now which represents that moral truth. We're trying to think, for example, just as a thought, again, a thought exercise. Who? Name a moral hero on the American landscape. Once upon a time, there was a Martin Luther King. Once upon a time, there were rabbis. There was a Stephen S. Weiss or an Abba Hillel Silver. Who represented, Louis Finkelstein, represented a moral truth from a religious standpoint. There, even a Billy Graham, who represented a moral truth from a Christian standpoint. There's nobody. Everybody, we tend to undermine everybody. We find dark skeletons in their closets, and I think people are dying for that. And one of the things an institution does, it is a social representation of a moral truth, the social embodiment. It use a Christian language, an incarnation of a moral truth in the world. You walk into the synagogue, and the synagogue says, you can be a better person. You have a purpose in the world. You have a meaning in the world. There's a bigger narrative into which your narrative fits. You walk into a church, and the idea is you can embody the Christ in bringing redemption to the world. I think that people are dying for this moral truth. Sherry, go ahead, your turn.
So I'm going to push you on a little bit. I think people are not dying for these singular cultic leaders to give them moral truth. I think people are dying to discover their moral truth and to be inspired by other people who are thinking about that. So what I think the digital has given us is a democracy of ideas for people to share their moral truths. And what I think the communities do is to go back and be in a group of people that you can talk about it with and figure it out and filter it with a great teacher. So I think they work hand in hand. And I don't want certain people that we look to as the end all be all of moral truth. What I want is people to discover their moral truth by seeing examples of it all around them and wrestling with it in their community with like-minded people or not, and then living that way.
I completely agree with you.
I just want to push you on that.
I'm not offering gurus. I'm not offering that kind of moral truth. I'm offering people who concern, because religion is very personal. And I think morality in some ways is very personal.
I think people have more of it than they think. They just need other people to think it out with. So they can go to the digital and learn it in the large questions, and then they can come sit in your office and say, let me figure out what this means for my life as I'm navigating my mother's death.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? That's the synergy. So this is coming from a rabbi who built a digital platform, but who spent 10 years in a pulpit and knows the value of both, right? Really knows the value of both.
Mark, what were you going to say?
Yeah, look, I think you misunderstand what a guru is and what these people brought. I mean, Billy Graham's a perfect example. Billy Graham went out and spoke, and he never made a church. He never did a network. His evangelical move was, Jesus loves you, and go to your own church and go to your own communities and be revived and be evangelized and all of that. The question is, what are the teachers teaching? And I would push on this idea that it's this search for your own morality. I never met people who were really searching in that way or framed it in that way. In fact, I've never met anyone who framed it that way. Actually, what they feel and what they speak about and what they said, and this was over and over, thousands of speeches, it's what they said to us, is that you brought us hope. We were not in search of morality. We know about doing the good thing, doing the right thing, but we get sad, we get depressed, we have people who we love who died. We're worried about dying ourselves. And so what they needed was a source of hope. And you are exactly right, Eddie, that there's no place, if you look at all of the offerings on TV and the platforms, they're all cynical and they're all secular. And the idea of bringing hope, why was Oprah so popular? I think because her message was a hopeful message. And so I think that's the first thing. The second is that they're looking for a belief in God. They're not looking for another secular way to do morality. They're looking for a belief that God cares about them and that the God they believe in believes in them and wants them to reach out to God and be God's partner. And I think from the Jewish point of view, they're looking for a way of finding solidarity with the Jewish community throughout the world. And then finally, they're looking for someone who won't throw fire and brimstone at them, but who's gentle and loving, who are gentle and loving and who are accepting. And that's what Tommy and I tried to bring. It was a message of acceptance, a message of love, and a message of friendship. A woman said once, your lecture that you just gave was the best lecture I ever heard. And I said, why? What were the things we said and that you loved? And she said, nothing. I don't remember anything you said. What I remember was how you looked at Tommy when he was speaking. And I remember how he looked at you when you were speaking. That was the moment. That's when I understood we were modeling a friendship that they could take home and make their own little God squads. By, as Tommy used to say, look across the fence, say hello to the person across the fence, and embrace them in your love. That's what we said. And that's what works. That's what works. And the opposite, which is so often the case, particularly with young preachers, is to yell and scream and castigate. And I never found that to be in any way attractive or in any way effective. That's what I would say about that.
Sherry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just, it's like, it was about 4 minutes back. I would, first of all, there's a lot of that I didn't agree with. I don't think what's out there is negative and all platformy. And I don't think it's reductionist to that people just want hope. I think that we are bombarded by messages all day long that previous generations were not. And I think we need help sorting and filtering all that information to uncover what's deeply meaningful and fulfilling for us as a human being. And we need teachers both on a thought level, and we need teachers on a very personal level, and we need each other to be each other's teachers. I don't think it's about finding the guru who is going to give us hope and we just pour ourselves into it. I just really don't anymore. And I never did, I should say. I believe we're our own gurus. I mean, I wrote a book about it, is Be Your Own Guru, right? That's not the name of the book, but the book was We Plan, God Laughs, because everybody's looking externally for something. So I don't think it's as reductionist as, I think people are confused. Look at how teenagers are looking at gender and identity. I can tell you, I never questioned identity if my sex was a girl or a boy. I did not ever, that question never came to my mind. And millions of kids do that today because they're bombarded with messages that they have to filter and they need to understand, and they need teachers to help them do that. But they certainly do not need preachers telling them what to do and how to do it.
And I think that what people look for, I mean, again, I apologize if it's reductionist. I don't mean it to be that way, but I think connection, and from connection to community, because I think that ultimately it is a pretty lonely society. And the theory of, and the philosophy of individualism, which is so American, still has a hold on the culture. So to go beyond my own boundaries and to find people who understand me and approve of me and support me and help me, that's one of the things that people are just hungry for. And the other thing is meaning, and I mean that in a very broad way, meaning a narrative that my life fits into. Young people particularly are looking for a sense of purpose. They have every advantage in the world. They have every advantage of wealth and leisure and possibility, but no direction about what shall I invest myself in? What can in other words, I've received everything in my life. What can I give my life to? I want to give my life to something bigger than myself, so that I have a sense that I'm doing something very, very important in the world. And that's what people come to our institutions for. And our institutions will be successful to the extent that they offer these things. They offer connection and community and meaning and purpose. And that we have a set of rituals and expressions, symbols of these things that are accessible to people and in some ways inspiring and moving to people. So let me finish today by asking each of you to play prophet. It's always a role that rabbis love playing. I want you to be a prophet, and I want you to look forward now. We all have a sense that while COVID might not have changed everything, it certainly exposed a great deal of our institutions to questioning and criticism. So tell me one thing in the institutional life of Jewish life and institutional life of religion that's going to be different 10 years from now because of the experience we're having right now. One thing that's going to be different. Okay, Mark, you want to start?
Yeah, well, it's what I said. You're going to have in the smorgasbord of opportunities that you have available to you because of the digital platforms that are out there, you're going to have a lot of choices. And so I think the one thing that's going to be different is that people are going to have teachers from all over the world. They're going to be able to sort out their life, their morality, their meaning, which, by the way, what is it when you do that? What happens to you when you do that? You have hope. That's what I mean by that. You have hope when you sort that out. You have hope when you work out all of the messages that are coming. So the first change, I think maybe the biggest change, is that people are going to have teachers all over the world. And those teachers are each going to bring the message of hope and meaning. Look what Rick Warren did in his purpose-driven life. And he wasn't afraid or reductionist on any level. He wrote a book more popular than the Bible. And he was really preaching this idea of hope and purpose, and that God has given you something to do that God gave no one else to do, and you can find it and you can do it, and that will bring hope in your life and meaning in your life. And all these words are just like bees buzzing around the honey. The honey is the hope, and there's different words that describe it. So the biggest difference is that our teachers will be everywhere.
Sherry, play prophet.
Well, I don't like playing prophet because I don't believe that anybody should be prophets. So let me push back on that. But what I like future thinking, and maybe they're the same, but no. What I think is that people will become much more grateful, appreciative, and intentional about who they interact with and how they interact. So it's not, I just go and I do this out of obligation, but when people are together, they will appreciate the intentionality of it, and they will have a new appreciation for it. And I think that's coming faster than 10 years. And what we'll see is that connections between people will become much more firm and deeply rooted, and we'll have more systems and ways to work through challenges because we won't want to let go of those connections so quickly.
Wonderful. We've always thought that the great challenge of synagogue life is to be both small and big at the same time. Big enough to withstand economic and social catastrophes, and to accomplish big things in terms of facilities and opportunities, but small enough to create intimate connections with people. And I think that trend is going to be accelerated magnificently from this catastrophe. I think that years from now, you're going to have a synagogue, but it's not going to be a synagogue. You're going to have a building with a name on the front of it. And in that building will be multiple synagogues. Maybe a Reform synagogue, maybe a meditation community, maybe a music collective, maybe an artistic collective, maybe a prayer group, maybe a Torah group. And they'll all be grouped up. So you'll have multiple ideologies, multiple movements, multiple expressions of religious life. We may even go to the extent that, as Mark and Father Tommy have modeled for us, multiple religious communities sharing the same physical space, sharing the same administrative structure, but enjoying a small group experience of community and spirituality and purpose. And I think that's what's going to, that to me is what the model, a model that comes out of this, because we'll discover that we need institutions, but as much as we need institutions, we need them to connect us intimately with one another. So thank you to Rabbi Gelman. Thank you to Rabbi Hirsch. I want to wish everybody a very good Shabbos. Following our Torah study this morning, of course, please join us for prayers here at Valley Beth Shalom. And this morning we celebrate a wonderful bat mitzvah. And following that, Rabbi Hillel Silverman shares his Torah thoughts with us. Tonight at 6:30 is Havdalah. And well, Yossi Dresner leads Minyan, of course, and then Havdalah. Minyan tomorrow morning at 8:30, every morning during the week at 7:30, every evening at 5 o'clock until we change the clocks. And then we'll go to 6 o'clock. And on Shabbos, of course, the Torah study next week and Kabbalat Shabbat before that. Starting Wednesday, I have a new class starting. College of Jewish Studies returns. And I'm going to be doing a class because I've received so many questions from so many friends asking some of the most fundamental religious and theological questions. And though I've taught this sometimes before, I think it's apropos again, and I think it's even more acute right now. So the questions that won't go away, a new course starting Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock here on Facebook and YouTube and on Zoom.
And I think we should get you on Clubhouse too, Eddie.
I would be delighted. Just let me know what that is, okay? I'm just learning Zoom. I'm good at email, so whatever you need me to do. But Wednesday nights, the questions that won't go away. This week, we're going to start out with a really simple question. The famous quip of Ogden Nash, how odd of God to choose the Jews. What's the purpose and meaning of Jewish life? A simple question. And then we'll move to some really hard ones. Thank you for being part of this Torah study this morning. We wish everybody a really good Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.